Welcome to the Village Well podcast, brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Last month, we had Aida Davis in the shop for a conversation with Mayor Michael Tubbs about her book, Kindred Creation, Parables and Paradigms for Freedom. With me here in the podcast studio this morning is one of our booksellers, Neema Belton. Neema is a recent graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design, where she studied film. She moved to Los Angeles recently to find work as a writer in the film industry, and she joined us as a bookseller back in October. And this is her first time joining me as co-host of this podcast. We're looking forward to having you here on this episode, Neema, and many others. So how do you like it here at Village Well?
I absolutely love working here. Not only do I get to be surrounded by literature and like-minded individuals, but I also get the opportunity to speak with incredibly talented and interesting authors like Aida.
Indeed. So Aida, she was born and raised in Los Angeles, a child of Ethiopian immigrant parents. She has degrees from Berkeley as well as USC's School of Public Policy. She founded and led a boutique consulting firm called Decolonizing Design, where she worked with clients in the nonprofit sector as well as Fortune 500 companies. She offered them her alternative framework to DEI, a concept of belonging, dignity, justice, and joy. And she's currently the Chief People Officer for the Sierra Club.
The book speaks about the African diaspora and looks to African and other indigenous ways of thinking. In our interview, we get into the sunken couch metaphor, why all her education didn't unlock peace, freedom, and comfort for her, and why she got so much joy from Kendrick Lamar's halftime Super Bowl show.
So let's hear the interview. This morning, we're very happy to have with us Aida Davis, our guest for today, and she's here to talk about her book, Kindred Creation, Parables and Paradigms for Freedom. Will you kick us off with a shelf talker for your book, Kindred Creation?
Yes. Well, first, thank you all for having me. It's such a pleasure. This is, in some ways, my neighborhood bookstore. I live in a neighborhood that doesn't have a ton of bookstores, and it was a great pleasure to do the book talk with Mayor Tubbs just a month ago. So thank you for hosting that.
It was great to have you here with him.
Yes. Mm-hmm. This book is really about creating life-giving alternatives in death-making situations. And so I agree, in this moment in time, we absolutely need it as a guide. But I think in general, when we're faced with difficult circumstances, oppression, subjugation, or just addressing some of the historical issues we've had as a nation and as a people, this book hopefully offers some perspective, some parables, and of course, some paradigm shifting, because I also love alliteration. Once you read this book, you will see that very clearly. And the idea is that by experiencing this book, you also are exposed to metanoia, this concept that the way you think, act, believe, even your spirit changes, and you have a different perspective on things. I don't expect people to agree with me. I don't expect people to find direct parallels or connections, but I do hope that in reading this, you see that I did not abandon myself, that I very much focused on using Black and African heritage as the center, and that unlocked a lot of power for me, and that if we all find our center, whatever that might be, you can also unlock that kind of power and potential for yourself. So it does a lot of things. I really recommend it. Highly recommend.
As do we.
Yeah. Well, in mentioning the title, I was actually curious about how you came up with it, because just the way that it's worded is so interesting and so specific.
Yes.
So I'd love to know more about your process in titling it.
Yes. Well, originally the book was commissioned to be Decolonizing Design, the name of my company. I founded a company, Decolonizing Design, that was really about creating alternatives like belonging, dignity, justice, and joy, like dignity violations, other concepts I'm happy to get into later. And in the process of writing this book, I realized that decolonizing design is about fixing someone else's mess. That colonization is not something I did or created. And so decolonization would be, repairing and fixing that. It's not my ministry. I think it should be done. It's just not my calling. I think my calling is about creating. And the difference to me between design and creation, and you went to SCAD, so
Yeah.
it's very specific.
I know.
Design feels very, one, it suffers a definitional dilemma.
Yeah.
When you say design, are we talking about architectural design? Are you talking about social design, literal design, mechanical design? We're not all, we don't have a shared understanding when we say that.
Yeah.
But even more, I think it just kind of is this sterile, like, we're going to improve this thing. It's just a fix. It's not giving life, which is what I think creation is.
Absolutely.
When you create a screenplay, a child, it requires gestation. The metaphor of birth is really extended. So creation had to be in the title.
Absolutely.
It's no coincidence that I birthed 3 children in the process of writing this. So creation was definitely going to be a core concept. And then Kindred has 2 meanings to me. One, I love Octavia Butler, who's an incredible sci-fi writer who wrote a book, Kindred. Yeah. And it was about reflecting on the past, specifically enslavement, but just living between the 2 worlds of the present and the past. And I just love her way of writing and her prophetic nature. So I wanted that energy and that spirit in the book. But then I really thought about when we, as Black, African, and Indigenous people, when we organize ourselves, absent of settler colonialism and racial capitalism, without that, how do we organize ourselves? Kinship. It's family, it's tribes, we organize ourselves around relationships. So Kindred had to be in there. Instead of decolonizing, fixing, I wanted it to be about what we do in our natural state as Black, African, Indigenous people. So that title came together, and then I just sort of, after writing the book, I looked back and I was like, wow, there's a lot of parables up here. So parables got to be in there. And what is the purpose of parables? Paradigms. I'm surprised there's not purpose, power, potential. Some of those, they did give me a limit. And so that's sort of that piece. But there's also this kind of subtitle that's at the top, which is about Black world making. Mm-hmm. And I talk about Blackness in this diasporic sense, that in the words of Burna Boy's mother, you were African before you were anything else. Mm-hmm. And I believe that Black people who have been separated from their mother being Africa, are no less connected to her than those who were born there. The issue is indoctrination, colonization, just all the different systems of oppression that have happened. But we do need to find our united African beingness and the divergent expressions of it, that we're not a monolith. We're not all the same just because I'm Ethiopian and call it you're Ghanaian or where. We're not the same. At the same time, we do share many similarities, and there's a connection that we should tap into. And I would even extend that to indigeneity. So we are indigenous. Africans are indigenous. Black people are indigenous to this country, to Africa. And so we should share that connection with First Nations people, with Native Americans, with, other indigenous people around the world. So that's also a call. And by saying Black world making, I'm saying that we can create new worlds even in ones designed to oppress us. We have. And so this book wants us to reclaim our heritage and humanity. All in one title. That's all the things I tried to stuff in there.
Yeah. I think that connection to indigeneity is so interesting, because when you think about the dominant white culture that leads in Europe and in the United States, it's all like about civilization that's been built and structured and philosophized, and now it's all about design and redesign and tweaking. And your master's degree in public policy was probably focused on a lot of like, how do we change things that already exist to make them better? But when you focus, it's like you're going back to first principles, like focusing on the indigenous concepts is there's so much in this book, but that's one of the beautiful seeds.
Yes, the parable of the tree. It tries to announce that in the beginning.
Yeah, tell us the parable of the tree.
Yes, so the parable of the tree is one of my favorites, but it's the first parable that sets the stage for the book, which is, for millennia, African, Black, and Indigenous people have known that trees communicate. Not only did we know that, we knew they were sentient beings, and that we would go to the baobab tree, speaking as an African, to make a decision, that it would help us have a conversation to, we're also deeply spiritual people, and that there's a spirit there and that we can connect with it. I say all that to say we've always known that trees are connected, that they communicate, and that, they possess these faculties that are important to acknowledge. But it wasn't until white civilization, and I'm using that loosely, but I'm saying in the last 40 years where scientists discovered that trees communicate. They could prove it empirically. That now we all believe it. Why didn't we believe it when we said and knew and felt that it was happening? There's this, methodology. There's this like love of just the empirical, the scientific, the white way. We just love that information, that way of thinking. And I guess I'm saying our epistemology matters too. Our epistemology is another way to consider the world. In no way am I saying these are binary either. Like, there's just a lot of ways to interpret the world. There are multiple truths.
Yeah.
Find the one that works for you and follow it, but don't, what I think American and maybe more capitalist approaches have done is say, well, there's only one right way. And it's our right way. And everything you believe is primitive. It's savage. It's uncivilized. It's superstition. It's all these things to dismiss it. And I wanted to start with the parable to say, but it's not. It's absolutely not. And we need to actually consider ourselves experts. We know things that aren't known without,
It's also a very female way of learning and sharing information.
Yes. And accepting new information and multiple truths. Like, I think there's a maternal, maybe not maternal or feminine, but there is something very caring.
Nurturing.
In the way, mothers do, or other mothers do, or village whatever. People who care for other people.
Well, I think it's like people who are not in power, how do they share information? Just through word of mouth, through, meetings at the village well. You know, you go to get your water for your family, and then you share the information. You know, like, oh, I found this way of doing these things. I learned that, the trees are telling me this, and,
You should go talk to a tree if you have a big position.
And the men are off at their business meetings and running their studies, and they'll get to it eventually. But
All right. So you structured the book with the 3 sections: remember, refuse, and reclaim. So in thinking about remember, why is it important that we start here?
Remember is deliberately hyphenated if you were to read it. So it's re-member. And there are typically double or triple entendres in many of the things I say. But this one is, on one hand, to bring together our ancestors, members of our family who have either been erased, dispossessed, who are not together. So we're going to bring them together and remember them like body parts on a body. And then, of course, unforgetting the past is important. And for so long, history has been told by the victors, by those in power. And there's a section where I say we're talking about history as told by the hostages, as the people who were in bondage, who were, their land was stolen, right? Those who were subjugated, why don't we listen to their history? And I actually, and maybe this, I would love to hear people's thoughts, I even invoke fiction here and talk about Toni Morrison's rememory, which is a kind of remembering that is almost spiritual and, otherworldly. And so she talks about, in Beloved, Sethe, I never say that name right, how she remembered or had rememory of enslavement, even though the passage from Africa to here, she had an embodied memory. Like, she just felt it in her spirit and she could retell it very clearly. And yet it didn't happen to her directly. It happened a generation before. And we say that's superstition, that's not real, we can't take that, that's a delusion. So is the fact that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. I mean, we clearly like delusion, or it's one or the other, right? Like, are we going to welcome all ways of understanding a situation, or are we saying there has to be a universal truth, which I think is dangerous? But if that's what we're saying, then there's a lot of other things that has to be dismissed. But the idea that we can reclaim ourselves, which is the last portion, by remembering, there's actually an interconnectedness between remember, refuse, and reclaim. I imagine it to be circular. Like most things. I don't think anything really is linear. So like a circle, these things are almost in a Venn diagram interconnected. So once you kind of reclaim, you find more members of your family, and then you go through this cycle. And then I don't know if you asked about refuse, but I'm happy to talk about that
definitely.
as well.
In the remember sections specifically, one thing that really just resonated with me was the sunken couch theory.
Exactly.
And talk about it. I loved the way that was worded, and just thinking about the fact that there are so many things that affect our lives every single day that we don't even begin to think about.
Come on.
And just thinking about, I mean, in that, like, in the way that the theory is worded, you know, like, this couch that you have is sunken in, and you never question why. You never think about why it's been worn down or why it's torn into. You just continue to sit on it. And
It's a metaphor.
I loved it. I loved it so much. So I wanted to ask more about that and the ways of that you've seen the effects of like colonialism, whether that's personally or just out in the world, that you maybe weren't necessarily aware of beforehand or before digging more into your reclamation process.
Yes, I think this is where refuse neatly interconnects, because the second parable, the parable of the table, is about questioning, why are we all fighting for a seat at a table that was never designed for us, that was denied our mothers, and that frequently has our humanity on the menu. Great. So what are we going to do to Black women? What are we doing for white women today? Like, and that's what it feels like right now, frankly, in this administration. Separate topic. But when I think about the sunken couch, I do think about the table, not just because they're both furniture, but because it's something we've just accepted as what we want.
Yeah.
We want to pursue this table. The couch is comfortable in some ways, just like your trauma can be comfortable, or your, the things you need to improve can feel very comfortable. This sunken couch is something that's obvious and everyday and in our face. And, when just as you were describing it, I was thinking of like, wow, this is what it's like to be a Black woman. Like, people casually sit on it. It's not a big deal. In many ways, we're invisible, but we have to be there because people have to sit. Right? And so like there's this, you need us, but you don't really care for us. You don't maintain us. You don't, right? There's that piece of it. But then there's also the like, what if you no longer want to be a chair or a couch, right? What if you have an aspiration to be a lamp, just to extend that, right? Or I don't know, you want to be a camera. You want to be anything. I think this is where refuse begins to allow us to define ourselves for ourselves. I don't want to sit at a table. How about that? Your table no longer has value to me. Being your chair is no longer something I'm interested in doing. In fact, and the parable of the table says, well, what would a table be if it was designed for a lot of different animals in the animal kingdom? So if a lion, a giraffe, a bee, right? These are different shapes. They have different ways of moving. They're, different ability. What would gathering look like? Well, it certainly wouldn't involve a table, because that is at one level. It would involve maybe a circle so people could see each other, right? You would just think, your paradigm would shift, and you would think, well, if I want these people or these animals to enjoy the experience of gathering, I would do it completely differently.
And get the most out of it.
And I would enjoy it too, because let's say the lion who designed the table to work for him, the lion can still roam and do what it needs to in a different arrangement. And so I think beginning to say that there's a part where I talk about Audre Lorde's the master's tools won't fix the master's house, which I believe. And I said this actually controversially here. I said, what if I'm not interested in the master's house at all? I don't want to fix it. I don't want to build it. I don't want to do anything. And someone in the audience said, well, we built that house. That, as a Black woman, I built this house, which I actually took. I think that is an important way to reframe that, to say, this is my house too. This is not just his house. He doesn't own it. I too have a part of this house. At the same time, I do think about, it feels like many times we might be in an abusive relationship in this country.
Yeah.
Sometimes you walk out of the house. you just got to leave the house. Thinking about like literal domestic violence, what do? You just have to walk away, even if you built so much. And I think it gives you unique vision and ways of creating, because you've had that experience, to create something more beautiful, an alternative or a way of living with a, family that's different. So I guess all of this is connected to say we can refuse what has been offered and create something much more beautiful. But first we have to recognize, are we the chair? Are we the furniture? Is the table working? And I think that realization, especially, I'm going to speak as a Black woman who got her master, did all the things that I thought would unlock peace and freedom and comfort for me. They absolutely did not. It absolutely did not. And because I have now sat with the fact that maybe this investment wasn't what I wanted, I have to be able to release that. I have to be able to say, my public policy degree, it was amazing. Fight on, go USC. I love the school. Love the school. No notes. Great school. Wow. At the same time, it did teach me everything's about trade-offs. You got to make minor improvements. Like, that is just, I think because I learned that so deeply, I'm like, I deeply don't subscribe to that. Now I really understand what you're saying. And for me, I want to just create new things like belonging, dignity, justice, and joy, like dignity violations, or just new ways of using precise language to help people think differently, create differently, do differently.
And that's actually a perfect way to lead into the refusal step, because you mentioned like just answering those like defining questions of who you are, because if you don't know who you are, you don't know what you want. And I think that's such a large part of the process in creation, in rebuilding, is how do you know how to rebuild and what the purpose of rebuilding is and what you want to rebuild when you don't know who you are. And I think that was, again, just so beautifully said. I love that. And I really loved in that section as well, talking about joy as resistance, because I do think it's something not talked about enough. Just as Black people, that we, first of all, just deserve to have it.
And we create it endlessly.
Absolutely. And specifically, one of the quotes that you said was, one way the oppressed can design their own world for potential and freedom is by participating in the inventive and imaginative world of creating fiction.
Yes.
And as a writer and a filmmaker myself, one of like my life goals in creating is the fact that I can showcase Black people just as they are. Because I think growing up, it was really difficult to always see Black people painted in a light of struggle and like just so many horrific stories where it shouldn't have made me sad to see people who look like myself on screen and in books. So I wanted to know for you, like, who are your favorite filmmakers or creatives that just inspire joy within you, that you love seeing, the culture reflected in?
I'm so excited to say this. I can't hold the Pulitzer Prize winning Kendrick Lamar,
Absolutely.
Who is not necessarily, but like he is a writer. Talk about operating from your center. Just never abandoning yourself, never abandoning your people, your tribe. He literally brought his tribe to the Super Bowl. Yeah. And I understand that, like, I think he made that for me. Like, I really felt like he did that for
I
Aida,
understand.
very specifically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I say that because it was subversive directly, but also subtly. I think fiction has this way, and as a result of, but fiction and relatedly metaphors have a huge cognitive effect on people's bodies, I think. Just what is possible. Like the very fact that, in the Super Bowl, I mean, there's so many deep metaphors yes, all over the flag, so many. But just the fact that he used one of the biggest platforms in front of one of the biggest fascists, in my opinion, to announce his humanity, to celebrate his heritage, but then also very specifically, he talked about the metaphor of this game that he was playing and that he was going to win. Mm-hmm. in spite of all the forces against him. And I think he gave me a sense of joy and hope. And I mean, having Serena, it was playful. It was funny. It was when he was like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm doing it. Of course I'm going to do it, you know? And just that sense of, I am here, and I'm not making myself smaller for anyone. I mean, there's nothing for me more joyful to see than someone who refuses to make themselves smaller.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because he has a song, Be Humble. And in my mind, I think of being humble is he, you know.
That's not at all what he meant.
No, not at all. That, and then, of course, Toni Morrison. If you read this, she's the patron saint of this book.
Yes.
And she really changed my paradigm, not only through her fiction, but in her interviews. I mean, she has been badgered in interviews about, why do you write only about Black people? And she always responds, you don't ask why Tolstoy or Faulkner or name your favorite writer doesn't
Name
write
anyone.
it. Come on.
Yeah.
And she said, when I say people, I mean Black people. And that's not a bad word. That's not bad.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? And that just gave me so much permission. I must have 1,000 of her YouTube counts were from me, because I just kept, anytime I was like, this feels too centered on me. Oh, nope, not enough, not enough. And I went back. So I think really great fiction writers, and you'll see here, 2 of these are philosophical fiction, do that. They really open our minds to what's possible and show ordinary Black people in a way that's heroic, but not intentionally. It's just, I mean, Kendrick
just
is a
existing.
hero. Yeah. You know, like being yourself is powerful and beautiful. And now others feel, I hope, permission. I certainly did. I came back into work that next day. Really myself. Y'all like that Super Bowl? Yeah, so.
Amazing. And I also think as well, when just talking about existing in general, you know, how you mentioned like refusal can be something as simple as just wearing your natural hair. And
which I am not, but I see it. And I know it's more work.
It's so
beautiful.
Much more work.
It's so much more work.
So much more work. But even things as simple as that, it's nice to know that, like, you know, you don't have to be this savior for the culture. You don't have to be a saint. You just have to be. And I think that's so important for people to know as well.
Well, have you ever read Nikki Giovanni's Revolutionary Woman?
I haven't.
It's a poem. It's like a short. I'm happy to send it to you. But it's a short poem. I'm not even sure if it's in one of her books. But she talks about, you know, I always thought a revolutionary woman would be the most knowledgeable. I'd be the most knowledgeable. I would stand up to the oppressor. I would do all. And it was like a list of all the things we all assume revolutionary women do. Protest, lead, you know, reading conversations, all the things. And then she ended by saying, to start a revolution, I just need to return to my most natural state. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, which is, I just need to go back to who I am when no one told me who I had to be.
Exactly.
And then I can really get it started, whatever I want to do.
And then moving into the reclaiming process. So I know that in the book, you know, you talk a lot about the culture that you grew up with as the child of Ethiopian immigrants. And I think one of the most interesting parts of it is trying to find that reclamation aspect when you're not quite sure of that culture. Because I know that for me, I did not grow up with anything specific. No like specific country, no specific customs or culture other than American culture, which obviously is not for me. So with people that are trying to, you know, begin their reclamation process that don't have as much of their identity tied to any specific culture, how would you go about informing them and helping them start that journey?
Yes. So there are 2 sort of frames. First, I absolutely am so blessed to be Ethiopian and have my parents be, you know, so proud of that and teach me the language and the customs and the rituals and traditions. That said, I'm not accepted in Ethiopia. So I don't feel like fully Ethiopian. And also, you know, growing up here, because I was different in a lot of different ways, I never was accepted, at least growing up. I feel very accepted now as a Black woman, but growing up I was kicked out of BSU meetings and just never really felt like I totally belonged in any one place. And I think that's what took me down this path of like, who am I? And that kind of is a segue for, I think, Black folks in this country, or even in the diaspora, Caribbeans, wherever. I mean, we absolutely have an embodied historical knowledge that we need to begin to reclaim. That's separate from American culture. And I think you can lead that in telling different stories, like the stories of Maroons in the Great Dismal Swamp. These are fugitive Black people who started whole new societies that mimicked African villages. They didn't have money, they didn't have it. That is something that happened in our collective American history that has been erased, I think. There is the fact that, have you ever poured, or do you know anyone who has ever poured liquor out when someone dies?
Yes.
That is a libation ceremony. We need to start making those connections to West Africa. In your house, or in your grandmother's house, or your mother's house, is there an area where they have, a picture of a transitioned loved one, maybe flowers, lace, like maybe Barack Obama on the wall, but like a very intentional space.
My grandmother has a calendar of Barack Obama.
To this day.
Yes.
These are like altars. These are reminders to, again, a part of our African heritage, our Black heritage, whatever that is, that I think is separate from American culture. There's grills. I mean, wearing gold. During a time of enslavement where our physical bodies were our only real estate, we dressed the best. We, ornamentalized ourselves. All of that is a part of our history. And I think there is work to be done collectively to uncover and create and share our own history, which is distinct from American history. I mean, of course it's a part of it, but this idea that we were just enslaved. No, there was Nat Turner, there was Harriet Tubman, there's all these people who escaped, they're erased. There are white abolitionists who died, who did so much, and they're erased. Like, we need to reclaim what the story is. Absolutely. And we tell Harriet Tubman was beat so many times that she would have dreams of freedom. That's how she began the Underground Railroad, not because she was feeling good and woke up one day. And so I think even in this extreme moment with Donald Trump and just all the things that are happening, I think we need to indulge in our alternative ways of knowing. And if you are, a descendant of enslaved people, there's a rich history. Our history is like the quilt of discarded pieces. We just have to now sew it together, take the pieces and begin to create our own quilt for warmth and beauty and comfort.
That's so beautiful. I love that quilt metaphor. And then the diaspora, and then the different experiences, and sometimes it's hard to frame. And we keep saying, your book has all of these different things in it, but thinking of it as a quilt metaphor is helpful. We're trying to just build things in kind of one square at a time.
Yes, it doesn't all have to be done at once. And maybe for our generation, it's just this quarter of the quilt, right? We don't finish it, but we continue
Pass it on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But in a way that's strong and beautiful.
Yes. And that's what quilts have been for generations. They've been, not my family, but I think in some families, people maintain them, they keep them pristine, and they give them,
and keep working on
generations.
them.
Yeah, keep working on them.
Keep evolving. Yeah.
And then to kind of bring it home as well. So I really loved the line, belonging can be extended to the feeling of being home. And just like the concept that home is a village, and especially when it's, been stolen and pillaged and destroyed and things like that. So what is your definition of home?
I think anywhere I am, I belong.
Absolutely.
In other words, anywhere I am can be home. I do think there's an element of home that requires your intentionality and your, we live in a world of rights, not responsibilities. And so it is my right to do this. It is my right to do that. I don't subscribe to that as much. I think it's my responsibility. If I'm in this space, I'm not going to leave it worse than I found it. I feel responsible to respect the art, to respect the people in it. And that's how I view any home, my own or others. And I think belonging is that type of thing where we first have to have a deep sense of self-determination and define ourselves for ourselves. Anywhere I go, I'm going to make it better. I don't subscribe to the idea of imposter syndrome because I think I worked 3 times as hard to get anywhere. There's no way I'm an imposter.
Oh.
I definitely belong here.
I've struggled with that. Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it took a lot for me to get here. So that would be a disservice to myself and everyone who helped get me here to say I don't belong. That said, the idea of home, I think, is also tangible to a lot of people. And I understand very well many people live outside. Mm-hmm. They may not have a physical home. But in the same way, we all experience womb to tomb. We all experience birth. Right? Like there are just some things that all of us experience. Mm-hmm. I think having a concept of home is something people have, whether they design it or not, whether they create it or not. It is a way of thinking. And I hope, and I love that in this conversation, and in the previous conversation I had here, people said, this is my home. The master's house is my house. You know, these are, that they can assert their humanity and assign it to wherever. I think that's such a beautiful and powerful way of being, and we need to encourage that and support that. And particularly, I think Black women lead this.
Yeah.
The movement of belonging, we lead it. And if we can continue to just be comfortable in our wholeness, I think it will attract others to do the same and inspire them too.
And there's so much that you write about that's so resonant with the mission of Village Well. You know, the word belonging is in our mission. We want people to feel like
they do.
Yeah, we want people to feel comfortable and welcome, and then inspired and connected.
Yes.
And then the idea of creation is also something it wasn't initially when I built this business. I didn't initially think, I'm going to create a space where people can create their thing, but what I discovered was that's what happened.
Yes.
You know, you'd create a place that's welcoming and comfortable, and people come in and they do their creative work, and it's just so beautiful to see. Like, you know, it's like it's literal. Like I'm writing a screenplay or I'm painting a picture. You know, we see people doing all these things, but just, you know, to have a third space and let people come in and be themselves, they create the best version of themselves here, and then they go out and they take that into the world, so it makes me so happy.
At our book talk with Michael, there was a woman who I think is a regular here. Yeah. She was so proud to show me her art on the walls.
It's right behind you.
Okay.
Yeah, Cola Smith is an artist who spends a lot of her days here.
Yes,
yeah.
But she felt so much connection to this place, and it felt like her home. Like she was walking me through her living room. She said, look at this, I did this, and this connects to your book in this way. And it just felt like I felt at home. I think part of feeling home, it's not just an individual experience, it's interconnected. Yeah. When someone welcomes you, I believe we have great hospitality, and we won't let you go without eating, without, drinking, the whole thing. And I felt that energy from a woman who I assume visits here. She doesn't live here.
Yes. She spends quite a bit of time here, but yes.
And that, she is physically represented here.
She is, yeah. And every time she brings me some other piece of her art, I've made these little angels. She made these beautiful collage angels. And I said, these would make great Christmas ornaments. Let's, just decide what you want to charge for them and package them up, and we'll sell them here on consignment. And the same thing with all, she made these beautiful Valentine's cards that sold well this season. So, she's an artist, and she's definitely one of the great creators that are in this space. But people are doing it in all kinds of ways. Academics and scientists and
UCLA. I know
writers.
There are a lot of students that come here.
Yeah, it's great. We close out each of our interviews here asking our guests to share with us some books that they've loved. So I know you brought 3 books with you, and will you share them with us? What are the books that you recommend for our listeners?
Okay, so this one, I'll start with the hardest to get.
Okay.
This is Huey Newton and Ericka Huggins, Insight in Poems. It's hard because it's been out of print for a very long time. And Ericka Huggins herself gave this to me. She was a former Black Panther who was in solitary confinement for a very long time for her work and beliefs. And obviously Huey Newton is the co-founder. And just it connects me to my work as an organizer, my time in Oakland, my deep connections to, the Black Panther movement, who they really cared about nurturing and taking care of the community, from the free breakfast program to the sickle cell. Just innovative. If the government wasn't providing it, they would create it, and they would do it quickly and provide for their people. So this is a reminder, and life without poetry is just not worth living. So, a book of poetry this is a prized possession. I had to take it out.
I
the
can
safe.
tell.
Yeah.
Yes, I can tell.
So
well worn and beautifully kept.
Yes. And then these two are historical, philosophical fiction. I don't know if those are categories, but I think they...
Say the names of them.
So this is Paulo Coelho's By the River, Piedra, I Sat and Wept. Have either of you read this?
I have not.
Oh my goodness, it's a very quick, beautiful read. I highly recommend it. And like most of his work, like The Alchemist and Manuscript from Accra, he is just teaching us so much through metaphors.
And
Yeah,
parables.
this is a love story. It's beautiful.
Oh, wow.
And then Chinua Achebe is one of the great African writers.
Right.
Things Fall Apart is kind of his, most
That's
signature.
the first of the trilogy.
Yes. And, I think it does a great job of describing colonization and understanding Africa from an African's perspective. So I highly recommend this for the fiction readers.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And
Oh my
thank you,
goodness.
Neema,
This was
for leading our conversation.
amazing.
If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned through our website. This episode of the Village Well podcast is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you next week, and keep reading.